Hello everyone, this is part 5 of What If Naruto Was Trained by Black Zetsu, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Jiraiya-sensei, Naruto frowned, looking around at their surroundings. How come we're out here today? Don't you trust me, kid? Not really. If there was one lesson Naruto could take away from the recent invasion, it was that, while faith and hope had their places, trust was something he had some difficulty putting stock in. Suna had betrayed Konoha, Gaara had betrayed Suna, and he had betrayed Gaara. Trust was hard to build and easy to break. Of course. It's just, this place is so open. What's wrong with our normal training spot? It's not big enough for what I have planned, the Sannin responded, looking around furtively. Naruto wondered if he was waiting for someone to appear, or rather, hoping that someone didn't appear. Alright, kid, enough questions, let's get down to business. He bit his thumb, smeared the blood that bubbled up along his opposite palm, and went through a series of seals before slamming his open hand upon the ground. A large blue and orange-colored toad appeared in a burst of smoke, a rather sizable scroll held in its mouth. That, Jiraiya stated somewhat smugly, is the Kuchio's no jutsu. And this is the summoning contract for the toads, he continued, gesturing towards the scroll. All you have to do is write your name and put your fingerprints in blood, and then you'll be able to join the privileged few capable of summoning toads. Naruto figured that he was supposed to act impressed or awed or something, but it was hard to focus on the right expression to display when he was inwardly laughing at the irony. Zetsu had been right, again. Granted, Jiraiya was probably offering him the summoning contract as part of his training rather than as a way to keep tabs on him, but the blonde wasn't so stupid as to think the latter wasn't true in some sense. The Sannin had heard everything said during his meeting with the Sandaime, and if someone had seen him speaking with Gaara either during the invasion or in the month leading up to it, Konoha was sure to be mildly suspicious of his behavior. It was better to be safe than sorry. He had to reject Jiraiya's offer without throwing himself under even further scrutiny. Wow, Jiraiya-sensei, that's pretty cool, but, he frowned again, looking thoughtful, I dunno if I wanna learn Kuchio's no jutsu. What, kid, do you know what you're saying? Do you know how many people would kill for the opportunity to follow in the great Gama Sennin Jiraiya's footsteps? He asked incredulously, striking a ridiculous pose. Naruto scratched the side of his head in pretend thought, a lot. Damn straight, Jiraiya snorted, crossing his arms. He sobered up in the next moment. You sure about this, kid? Summons are damn useful, and the toads are some of the best. Naruto nodded. Yeah, I'm sure. It's not really about strength, it's just, well, I wanna become a real ninja, and that, he gestured to the toad Jiraiya was standing on, isn't really subtle. The toad disappeared in a cloud of smoke, allowing the Sannin to alight on his feet. A real ninja, huh? Jiraiya repeated, face unusually serious. Tell me, kid, do you have any idea what that means? Jiraiya's abrupt personality change warned Naruto that he had wandered into a potentially sensitive topic. He would have to tread carefully with how he responded to the Sannin. Well, he pondered, I think a real ninja is someone who hides in the shadows and strikes when the time is right. So learning skills that help to do that is important. The brief silence that followed caused Jiraiya to raise a skeptical eyebrow. Is that it? I think so. He peered at his teacher curiously. Did I forget something? Jiraiya exhaled a breath that Naruto hoped was a sigh of relief. Well, if you want to get technical, a real ninja is one who follows all the rules taught in the academy. But the rules are just guidelines. Shinobi learn to develop their own skills and beliefs through their experiences in the field. Knew that already, Naruto thought, thanking Zetsu for the insight he had imparted months ago. At least Jiraiya wasn't advocating for the wall of fire, not yet, anyway. Some of the rules are crap, anyway, the white-haired man continued. It's more important to find your own path in life. Above all else, ninja are people, and each individual's decisions shape his or her own life. Some focus on physical strength, some on strategy, or espionage. Jiraiya, we need to speak with you. And some are annoying as all hell, the Sannin muttered, turning to the intruders. One was a short male with neatly maintained spiky gray hair and a beard, black eyes peering at Jiraiya from behind green-rimmed glasses. His associate was a gray-haired woman only a couple inches taller than Naruto, her hair curled into a bun atop her head. Both were dressed in formal wear that Naruto supposed meant they held positions of authority, and he wondered if it was these two that his teacher had been so desirous to avoid. Pasting a somewhat sickly smile on his face, Jiraiya greeted, "Homura-sensei, Koharu-sensei, what brings you to my humble training spot?" Homura lowered his head slightly to fix the Sannin with a stern look over the rim of his glasses. "Don't pretend that you haven't been avoiding us, Jiraiya. We weren't born yesterday." Clearly, Jiraiya coughed. The edges of Homura's mouth creased downwards, making his seemingly permanent frown appear even more disapproving. Koharu cleared her throat. "It is imperative that we speak with you, Jiraiya." She glanced over at Naruto, who was observing the interaction between his teacher and the two counselors silently. "Alone. Fine." The Toad Sannin turned to face his pupil. "Scram, kid. I'll catch up with you later." Deciding that it was probably better to obey, and silently grateful for the opportunity to escape, Naruto nodded and left, sparing no attention to the furrowed brow of his white-haired teacher. Whatever the two elders wanted to discuss with Jiraiya was no business of his. LLL. With his training with Jiraiya postponed and Zetsu's warning to not draw undue attention to himself, meaning that he shouldn't go hunting for the plant man for Zetsu's equivalent of training, in mind, Naruto found himself wandering towards Yamanaka flowers. Hands laced behind his head, the blonde watched dispassionately as the Hidden Leaf's denizens, both civilians and shinobi alike, worked together to repair the damage caused by the sound invasion. He wasn't entirely sure how to feel about what such cooperation said about society. If members of Konoha truly believed in the Wall of Fire, the blonde couldn't really say he was all that surprised at the willingness of people to help one another out. In fact, now that he thought about it, society was all about working together and relying on others in order to survive. Businesspeople relied on customers in order to earn money for their livelihood. Products were grown or crafted by farmers or artisans, providing necessities and comforts for pleasant living, and then sold to the populace by some third party, if not the grower or crafter himself. The entire world was one big, dependent system, requiring others to function properly. Except for Zetsu. The plant man was the one component in the system that didn't need to belong, really, and wasn't necessary for its operation, and Naruto found that he envied his tutor's freedom. Self-sufficiency was a far-reaching, though attainable goal, and the thought of one day achieving it allowed the blonde to justify to himself everything he did in and for Konoha. When he was eventually allowed to partake in missions again, it wouldn't be for the Hidden Leaf, but for his future. Watching a chunin assist an elderly craftswoman remove debris from her shop, the Jinchuriki tried to envision the scene from his philosophy's perspective. If people worked only for themselves, then the old woman would have no way to restore her livelihood to workable condition, as the chunin wouldn't perform labor without being compensated. Would the Konoha nin assist the older woman if he wasn't earning money to do so? Was he in fact helping her out of the goodness of his heart? Naruto shook his head. Hypotheticals were difficult to answer without falling prey to the personal biases he held in his heart, even when trying to examine things neutrally. It was far easier to experience the situation himself and then see which perspective he agreed with. The evidence of people's goodness made him, not necessarily sick, but uncomfortable. He wasn't sure if it was the knowledge that his own philosophy focused on self-reliance, and the hypocrisy of how to reach that point, or the fact that, as one who had been in need, Konoha's citizens hadn't reached out to help him, thus outing themselves as hypocrites. Simply knowing that he had probably saved a lot of lives by removing Gaara from the invasion caused him to scowl. What did their lives mean to him? Had he really made the right decision by manipulating his fellow Jinchuriki to not attack Konoha? Every decision had its consequences, and the repercussions of his made him think that perhaps he could have found a better solution. It was the price he paid for not fully considering the extent of his actions. "Hey, Naruto, help me out, will you?" Pulled from his thoughts, he looked over to find Ino carrying a tray of potted flowers outside her family's shop, several more trays already placed out front. Walking over, he could see that the shop had sustained burn damage to the outside, turning most of the flowers in the displayed trellises into ash. Much of the wood paneling needed to be replaced, and a stack of fresh planks was already leaning up against the undamaged part of the storefront. Ino greeted him with a grateful look after he walked into the shop, grabbed the nearest tray, and brought it outside. Thanks, she said. Everything we needed to repair the shop just came in, so Dad and I are working hard to fix it up. Well, she amended, Dad'll be back soon enough. When he didn't immediately reply, her brow furrowed and she asked, are you okay? Oh, yeah, just thinking about all the damage Kanoa took. Half-truths, he thought, were far more believable than outright lies. It would be impossible, not to mention stupid, to tell Ino that he now felt like a complete hypocrite, granting aid to someone else without any sort of benefit to himself. Not that Ino and Inoiki couldn't fix up the place by themselves, but if being coerced into going to the Chunin exams had taught him anything, it was that friendship required some measure of self-sacrifice. Then again, he considered as he picked up a tray of violets, perhaps that wasn't the right way to think about what he was doing. If self-reliance was the philosophy he lived by, then self-interest could be considered an associate of that. By that logic, he could justify helping repair Yamanaka flowers as quickening the time he could return to work to earn money, not to mention allowing him access to the wolf's bane he wanted to experiment with. When he went back outside, Ino nodded in understanding. Yeah, I guess we did get hit pretty hard. And with the sandime, she took a deep breath and shook her head to clear it of the thought. I didn't see you at the memorial service. I went earlier, Naruto explained. Kinda said my own goodbye. I guess you and the sandime had a special relationship, huh? Naruto shrugged. You could say that. We used to, before I met Zetsu, anyway. Somehow, half-truths and non-committal answers were becoming a more natural thing to resort to, especially as people trod closer to topics he wanted to stay away from. You know, Ino began, picking up a hand trowel and digging out the scorched plants, you're a lot different than you used to be. You've said that before, Naruto pointed out, ripping open a bag of dirt and waiting until Ino told him he could refill the planters. I know, but that was before we became friends. Now that we've known each other for a couple months, well, I guess it's become really noticeable. She gestured to the newly made hole in the trellis, prompting her fellow blonde to fill it. You used to be so loud and obnoxious, but now, well, look at you. Naruto complied, looking down at himself and then giving the Yamanaka a questioning look. Yeah. Ino let out a long-suffering sigh, as if she couldn't believe she had to point out the obvious. You learned something about fashion sense, for one thing. Face it, Naruto, orange was never a sensible color. But that's not all of it, she continued, dislodging a violet from its container and placing it in the soil. You stopped trying to earn the attention of everyone around you, stopped pulling pranks, and you don't really hang out with anyone except me. Your apartment's practically empty, it's like you don't care about anything. She finished patting down the soil around the flower and shot him a sly glance. As good an idea as it is, there's more ways to get a girl to like you other than turning into Sasuke. Naruto gaped at her. I'm nothing like Sasuke, he protested indignantly. She snorted, stuck the trowel in the planter, and turned to face him fully, hand on her hip. Sorry, you're right, in fact, she continued, biting her lip slightly in a show of nervousness, now that I've gotten used to this new you, you're really cool. Sashaying her hips slightly, she took a step toward him. Maybe, if you wanted to, we could go out sometime. She fluttered her eyelashes to add to the effect. Her fellow blonde backed up a pace, nearly tripping over a bag of fertilizer. Ino, cut it out. Ino laughed, dropping the act and returning to her chore. You should see your face. Priceless. Still, she added after a moment of silence, there could be worse people to emulate than Sasuke. Naruto huffed and crossed his arms, sulking at the comparison. So not funny, not like that bastard, he muttered. Admitting his similarity to Gaara had been difficult, if only because the Sand Jinchuriki was both psychopathic and sociopathic, and because, on some level, Naruto knew that he and his fellow demon container were alike. But to be compared to Uchiha Sasuke, the classmate he had strived for years to be better than, and who he had eventually written off as inconsequential to his own end, was a bitter pill to swallow. However, Ino's statements tended to contain large kernels of truth. It was one of the reasons Naruto liked listening to what she had to say. Objectively looking through his more recent decisions and actions and comparing them to the personality Sasuke had displayed during both their time on Team 7 and in the academy, the blonde was forced to admit that there were some similarities. Like Sasuke, he now preferred working alone to working with others, though he wasn't so arrogant as to believe himself greater than his peers. It didn't help his case that embracing Zetsu's philosophy meant ostracizing himself even further from a society which already treated him with scorn and distaste. Viewed from that angle, it wasn't so much his personality that made him comparable to Sasuke, but his attitude towards society. Despite how much realizing their likeness burned, Naruto comforted himself with this thought, having decided that society's opinion of him didn't matter courtesy of his discussion with White Zetsu. Still, to think that he transformed to such a degree that his only friend, and at least he had one, how many did Sasuke have? Would point out he turned into a person he couldn't stand. That was a mighty fall. Or perhaps it was an ascension, depending on how one looked at it. As the blonde was contemplating how to classify his metamorphosis, his gaze fell upon an odd sight. Rounding the corner were two figures in green jumpsuits, walking through the streets on their hands. The smaller one was the boy he recognized as Tenten's teammate from the Chunin exams, Rock Lee. The other male was probably his teacher, though father wouldn't have been a far guess for how similar they looked. Finally, he thought, blue eyes tracking him as they passed by the flower shop. Despite his resolve the previous day to find Tenten and learn any tricks she had, Konoha was a large place, and randomly searching the training grounds for her had so far been a fruitless endeavor. Coming across her teammate and teacher, and better yet, following them, was just the breakthrough he'd been hoping for. Turning to Ino, he proclaimed, "I'll show you that I'm not like Sasuke. Unlike him, I can make new friends." Well, friend, anyway, he corrected mentally. With that, he bounded around the clutter-strewn outside Yamanaka flowers and began to trail the duo in green. As he left, he heard Ino shriek, "Sasuke would never leave a woman in need. Get back here, Naruto." LLL. Naruto wasn't sure whether Lee and his teacher actually knew he was following them or not. The Shinra Bansho, as amazing as it was, didn't lend well to tracking when the user possessed no sensing abilities. But if they did, they certainly didn't seem to mind his presence. Judging by their training regimen, Naruto considered them eccentric. It was a nicer way to say they were crazy without placing them on the same level as someone truly insane, like Gaara. Jiraiya had explained that the longer a ninja lived, the more prone he or she was to develop strange quirks. After having Zetsu as a tutor, Naruto couldn't find it in himself to disagree with such an assessment, no matter how much he butted heads with the Sannin. A short time passed before the two green-clad shinobi led him to their training spot, secluded in the middle of a large grove of trees. Hyuga Neji was meditating beneath the branches of a tree while Tenten was throwing kunai at straw dummies nailed into the trunks of the surrounding greenery. "Neji," proclaimed Lee, "my youthful rival." "HN?" Neji grunted without opening his eyes. "Back already? I challenge you to a fight." Lee finished, ignoring the Hyuga's attitude. "Neji, don't be so rude," Tenten interjected. "And will you accept his challenge for once? What point is there in fighting him?" Neji questioned. "The outcome has already been determined. My youthful students," boomed the taller, green-clad man. "While it does my heart good to see you so inflamed by the fires of your youth, I believe it would be more appropriate to introduce ourselves to our guest." Naruto took that to be his cue. Sidestepping out from behind a tree, he raised a hand in greeting. "Ah, hey, sorry about following you." "It is no problem," boomed the same man. "I am Mito Guy, and these are my youthful students, Lee, Tenten, and Neji. Tell me, have you come to learn how to stoke the fires of your youth?" Naruto blinked. What? He didn't understand the things Guy was saying, and unlike with Zetsu, he doubted he wanted to find out either. From his periphery, the blonde could see Tenten making a slashing motion across her throat, and he decided that he definitely didn't want to know. No, he corrected hastily, hoping he hadn't left too much of an opening for Guy to elaborate. "I actually came to talk to you," he finished, turning to face Tenten. "Me?" she echoed, surprised. "Yep," he nodded. "I was watching the Chunin exams." "Oh," he interrupted himself, turning to Neji, "your match was really good." "Naturally," Neji said, not even opening his eyes. "Fate decreed that I would be the winner." Weird, Naruto mused. That was a strange way to respond to a compliment. Well, it was still cool. You must be some kinda genius. He heard a loud smack and a groan from Tenten's direction. Naruto had a second to wonder what he had said before Lee shouted, "Neji, my rival. It appears as if even this newcomer recognizes your genius. But he does not know that there is a second type of genius, a genius of hard work. If only the Chunin exams had not been interrupted by our traitorous allies, I would have shown what a true genius of hard work could accomplish." Lee's babble was starting to give Naruto a headache. "Don't care," he interjected, uncaring as to how rude he appeared and returning his attention to Tenten. Before anyone could say anything else, he asked, "Can we talk somewhere?" Tenten was looking at him curiously, but she shook her head and said, "Yeah, sure, follow me." As the pair left, Naruto could hear Lee and Guy speaking in loud voices, though he paid little attention to what was being said. Learning to get along with the impassive, stuck-up Neji, who was a skilled shinobi, judging by his Chunin exams showing, was one thing. Trying to adjust to the energy and sheer volume that were Lee and Guy was an entirely different story. Sorry about Lee, Tenten apologized as they wandered through the forest. "He's a lot to take in. No kiddin'. He's not so bad once you get to know him," she continued, giving Naruto the distinct impression that she didn't want to give him the wrong idea about her teammate. "Lee was at the bottom of our class in the academy because he can't use ninjutsu or genjutsu, so he swore that he would become a ninja using only taijutsu." Guy-sensei supported him, but Neji, she frowned slightly, trying to think of the right words to say. Finally, she seemed to find them. "Neji's the prodigy of the Hyuga clan, a true genius, but he can be difficult to get along with at times. He thinks that things are destined to happen, and that Lee's lack of ability to use anything but taijutsu is just a sign that he's not cut out to be a ninja. Lee's determined to prove him wrong by showing Neji that a genius of hard work can beat a true genius, but so far he's been unsuccessful. Nowadays, Neji just tries to ignore Lee as best he can, but Lee's pretty persistent." And loud, Naruto added. "That, too," Tenten agreed. "I'm Tenten, by the way, but I guess you already knew that." The blonde nodded. "Yeah, like I was saying, I was watching your match in the Chunin exams." "Ugh, don't remind me," she groaned. "Getting taken out by that guy, that was so pathetic." "What did he do exactly?" Naruto asked after a moment. "That body that I was attacking was a puppet," she explained. "I can't believe I didn't notice that." A puppet, well, that explained a lot. A puppet body would be impervious to any sort of projectile attack short of an exploding tag, which solved the mystery of how Kankuro had come out of that fight without a scratch. On top of that, if the puppet body was hollow, there was plenty of space for weapons, bombs, and poisons, any of which could have easily incapacitated Tenten after getting close to her. It was one more thing Naruto noted he would have to be wary of in the field, though if Konoha's lack of puppeteers was any indication, they were probably a rare breed of ninja. "That sucks." Tenten nodded. "After that performance, I doubt I'll get promoted, though Neji might. People from clans have an advantage, I think," Naruto confided. "It's people like you and me who've come from nothing who have to prove ourselves." The bun-haired kunoichi shot him a strange look. "Were you even in the Chunin exams?" "Kinda," he hazarded. "My team failed the first test." "No wonder you don't look familiar." "Naruto," he offered. "My name's Naruto. Like I said, I saw your skill in the Chunin exams and thought that you could help me out." "My skill? With weapons, you mean?" she clarified, unrolling a scroll and summoning several sickles that she immediately began to juggle. Naruto watched the revolving circle of metal spin through the air, slightly entranced. It was one thing to become proficient with throwing kunai and shuriken, common ninja tools as they were. It was quite another to have the hand-eye coordination and confidence to juggle sickles so casually. Such comfort also pointed to experience with weapons other than the basics most shinobi carried around, something Naruto hadn't even considered when first observing the kunoichi. As if to prove this point, Tenten sent the sickles spinning high into the air, unsealed a handful of kunai, and then flung them off into the distance. One by one, she caught and released the descending sickles in the same direction, and as Naruto watched, the curved blades caught the kunai through the rings at their ends and then stuck, quivering, in the trunk of a tree. Stunned, the blonde could only blink. "Holy, are you a weapons expert, too?" Tenten asked, going to retrieve her projectiles. "Not like that," Naruto managed. "How'd you do that?" The kunoichi shrugged, resealing all of her weaponry except for a lone kunai, which she flipped idly in her right hand. Practice. When you want to be strong, you have to dedicate yourself to doing the best you can. Naruto understood that sentiment all too well. It was the backbone to his becoming reliant upon only himself, after all. Strength was the key to escaping the cycle of having to learn from others. Not that that necessarily applied to Tenten, who most likely didn't share the same philosophy he did, but growing stronger was a generic goal of many shinobi. Strength provided extra insurance against dying in the field. How come you chose weapons to get strong with? I mean, continued the blonde, they're not exactly a normal thing to focus on, right? Tenten tossed the kunai into the air, caught it so the blade was pointing straight up, and brought it to eye level, where she stared at it silently. You've heard of Tsunade-sama, right? Of the Sannin? Yeah. When I was younger, it was my dream to grow up and become just like her, she was my idol. As she spoke, Tenten seemed to be staring out into distance, her eyes starry. Wherever this story was going, Naruto could tell that his companion held Tsunade in the highest regards. When I became a genin, I tried everything I could to be like her, medical jutsu, Kuchio's no jutsu, chakra-enhanced strength, but I failed at all of them. But, eventually, I found something that I was good at. That was Fuinjutsu. The secret to sealing lies in what you seal, she explained, once more unrolling one of the scrolls she carried on the ground and kneeling beside it. With a swipe of her thumb across the parchment, a variety of weapons were laid out before her. Naruto recognized kunai, senbon, shuriken, makibishi, and sickles before his knowledge of ninja tools ran out. The different types of swords and other, more complex-looking weaponry were beyond his interest. Tenten picked up two of the sickles she had been juggling early, weighing them in her hands. There's so many different types of weapons that you can adapt to any situation by adjusting what you're using. Her right arm stretched out so that the top of the sickle was pointed directly at Naruto. It was then that I swore that, instead of becoming like Tsunade-sama, I would become a legendary kunoichi by my own merit, by becoming a weapons specialist. Take these kama, for example. Traditionally, they're used for reaping crops, but as weapons, they're used to block, trap, and disarm an opponent's weapon. Despite being more for short-range combat, they're capable of catching and trapping something more mid-range, like a staff. Wow, you know a lot about this stuff. I have to, Tenten stated, smiling at him. It's my specialty. Well, I want to specialize in senbon, but I'm having some problems with accuracy. There wasn't any point in telling Tenten that that was only half of his chosen focus. His knowledge of poisons would remain a secret until it became necessary to confide in the bun-haired kunoichi, if that time ever came to pass. Can you help me? Senbon, huh? She affirmed, cupping her chin in thought. Not exactly a commonly used ninja tool. I know that medics favor them because of how useful they are for acupuncture, and I use them because they're harder to spot than kunai, but, how'd you get interested in them? Well, there was this guy we fought on one of our missions who was really good with them, and I figured that since I had no other real skills, maybe I could get as good as he was. Tenten nodded in understanding, and Naruto gave himself a mental pat on the back. Half-truths continued to prove themselves effective. And in a way, Haku had inspired him to rededicate himself to his training by giving him a stepping stone to aim for on his path to his ultimate goal. You're not interested in any sort of melee weapon, are you? When Naruto shook his head in response, Tenten continued, well, I think it's a good idea, but, she shrugged, then unraveled a different scroll and summoned several targets. It's your decision. Now, let's see what you can do. That said, she walked over to several of the surroundings trees and pinned the targets to their trunks, stabbing a kunai through a small, metal ring placed at the top of each one. Returning to Naruto's side, she commented, go ahead. The blonde dipped a hand into his kunai pouch and came out with senbon gripped between his fingers, their tips resting against the palm of his fingerless glove. Holding them in front of his face, he lined up his shot and let the needles fly. Two of them hit the target, while the third flew past it. Turning to the next target, he repeated the motion, this time focusing a bit harder and releasing the needles one after the other instead of in a group. The result was better, all the weapons piercing the intended target. He repeated the exercise for all the targets Tenten had put up, the bun-haired kunoichi remaining silent throughout the entire ordeal. Well, Tenten began when Naruto looked to her for guidance, you're trying too hard. Every shot you made, you lined up beforehand and wasted a lot of time and effort for, well. You can be honest, Naruto prompted, I won't get mad. Tenten seemed to hesitate a moment before nodding and saying, okay, well, the results weren't the best. You're not bad, but you definitely need some work. Focus on throwing one senbon at a time for now, and stop overthinking the shot. Look beyond the target and let your weapon go in that direction. Your follow-through is important. If you notice that your arm doesn't end up pointing straight at the target, the senbon won't be released in the right direction. The motion should eventually become second nature to you, like this. She emphasized her statement by casually tossing a series of kunai, drawn from the pouch strapped to her leg, at each of the targets. Naruto noted that all the released projectiles hit their respective bull's eyes. The blonde listened as the older genin continued to critique and correct his shurikenjutsu, absorbing all the information she offered as he considered her character. Tenten was so far proving herself to be a rather valuable asset, where Naruto appreciated Ino for her knowledge of flowers and accessibility to poisonous flora. Tenten seemed to have just as much experience and proficiency with weapons, making her vital to perfecting the other half of his skill set. She was an expert, or close enough to one for Naruto's sake, in her craft, a sure sign of a good teacher. Beyond that, Tenten was also presenting herself as a mostly self-taught kunoichi with a realistic goal to achieve. She seemed relatively pleasant and mild-mannered, and best of all, she had yet to express some sort of infatuation with Sasuke, or any other male, for that matter. Her sensibility and objectivity, based on how she had described her teammates, were huge pluses, and the fact that she held no previous bias against him due to not sharing classes in the academy meant that befriending her would be a much easier task than it had been for Ino. It was hard to compare Ino to Tenten, especially since he had just met the latter, but until a time came where the older kunoichi held no more use to him, Naruto could see himself working with her just as easily, if not more so, than he could with Ino. Did you get all that? Yeah, sure, he agreed. Good. Tenten reached behind her back, once more bringing forth one of the miniature scrolls she stored her weapons in. In a fluid motion, she unraveled the first foot into the air, swiped her thumb across it, and re-rolled it, ending up with a weapon that resembled a kama attached by a chain to a small weight. Fight me. Naruto blinked, taken aback by the kunoichi's sudden intensity. What? Just because I'm a master marksman doesn't mean that I can't fight at close range. Even if you specialize, you have to understand the strengths and weaknesses of your techniques, and that means devising ways to counter any shortcomings you have. Holding the chain at a point closer to the weighted end, she began to twirl it, creating a blur of gray in front of her form. Using my kusarigama's weighted end, I can successfully repel any kunai, shuriken, or senbon you throw at me. Now, show me what you do. With that, she released the weighted end of the kusarigama, forcing Naruto to dive out of the way. There was a loud crunch, and Naruto turned to find that the weapon had torn a huge divot out of the trunk of the tree he'd been standing in front of. Holy shit, he thought, she's serious. His attention refocused on the weapons specialist as she tugged the chain back to her and returned to swinging the kusarigama's weighted end. Good thing I came prepared to fight with Jiraiya. He threw out a handful of kunai which were instantly repelled when Tenten brought the spinning chain around to bear. I told you that wouldn't work. She informed him over the whirring noise of the chain. Don't tell me you're not taking me seriously. I'll show you that a kunoichi is as strong as any male shinobi. Is that what people think? Naruto wondered as he dodged the kusarigama. While the Shinra Bansho would have allowed him to easily evade the other genin's assault, he was loath to reveal all his tricks, let alone his most prized one, to someone he had just met. Even confiding the technique in Ino had been a bit of a gamble, despite needing her to understand its use in order to test the extent of its abilities. But Tenten brought up interesting points. The first was one he had realized during the Chunin exams, which was that all techniques had their weaknesses, and that knowing them and knowing how to work around them was an important part of being a shinobi. For all Gaara's confidence in his ability to kill Naruto, the blonde had managed to evade death due solely to the attack prevention technique, and then incapacitate his fellow Jinchuriki by way of a gas bomb. Training to eliminate those weaknesses was important. Naruto had neglected his physical conditioning in favor of perfecting the attack prevention technique and making poisons to fit his chosen specialty, but as he continued to avoid Tenten's assault, he realized that doing so was a mistake. Just because Zetsu didn't use taijutsu in his life didn't mean that the same would or should apply to Naruto. Everyone's experiences were different, as his tutor liked to point out all too often. What was right for one person wasn't necessarily right for another. It probably wasn't something he needed to focus on immensely, say, to the extent Rock Lee apparently did, but becoming a well-rounded shinobi was important. If he didn't, the promotion that he strove for would be that much further out of reach. When Jiraiya returned from his discussion, perhaps he would be able to give the blonde some pointers on how to improve his taijutsu and counter his weaknesses. Surely someone with the Sannin's experience and reputation had plenty of advice to offer. But beyond acknowledging that he needed to branch out with his ninja know-how, Tenten had brought up a curious subject. Did people really think of men as stronger than women? As Tenten moved in closer and began to swipe at him with the sickle part of the kusarigama while continuing to keep the weighted end spinning, Naruto thought about it. The blonde concluded rather quickly that the knowledge he had on the subject was too small to come up with a proper answer. He had been in too few battles to accurately gauge the different calibers of male and female ninja, and while he'd often watched Team 10's training sessions, the only member he'd actually sparred against was Ino. Perhaps Zetsu, with his years of experience serving the hidden grass and additional years on the run, could give him a better idea of what Tenten meant. The bun-haired girl seemed to be too biased to get an objective opinion from if he asked for clarification. Deciding to prove to Tenten that he wasn't taking her lightly, Naruto planned his next move. Diving to the side to get some distance, he used the motion to unclasp one of his ceramic jars and hurl it at the kunoichi's feet. Upon impact with the ground, it released a cloud of thin, gray smoke that immediately sent the bun-haired genin into a coughing and sneezing fit. Success, he thought, activating the attack prevention technique while his opponent was temporarily blinded. The jar had contained a mixture of pepper and ragweed, a concoction which he had hoped could serve as a substitute for the manchineel gas he had yet to bottle. Rising up behind Tenten, who had stumbled a short ways out of the cloud to clear her watering eyes, he wrapped one arm around her waist and lifted a senbon so its tip was against her temple. Gotcha. What was that? Tenten coughed. Secret, Naruto teased. It was strange to consider, but his short time with Tenten had actually been fun. Maybe it was because, like Zetsu, the bun-haired genin had tested him, even if she had done so inadvertently, and expanded his worldview, causing him to look at things from other perspectives, and unlike when Zetsu did it, he didn't have to put up with insults or a snarky attitude with the older girl. Tenten, like Ino, could become the closest approximation to a friend Naruto had. Well, spoke a new voice, startling both genin. Not sure what I'm interrupting here, but I need to speak to the kid. Naruto and Tenten both whirled around to find Jiraiya leaning against a nearby tree, his face sporting a rather disturbing grin. Alone, if possible, little missy. Oh, of course, Jiraiya-sama, Tenten said, bowing hastily. To Naruto, she added, this was fun. Work on what I told you, and if you ever want more help or just a sparring partner, let me know. I could always use a break from my team. That said, she resealed her kusarigama and walked off into the woods, back towards where they had left her teammates. Naruto almost called after her to ask why she had decided to help him, but then decided against it. It was better to not have an audience for such a question, and he figured he could get his answer by returning the targets and kunai she'd left stuck to the trees. He waited until she had disappeared before turning back to the Sannin. What's up, Jiraiya-sensei? The toad sage straightened up and uncrossed his arms from where they had been folded over his chest. Pack up for a trip, kid, we're heading off to find the next Hokage. LLL. Naruto blinked. We have to what? You heard me, kid, Jiraiya stated. You and me are off to find the next Hokage. Yeah, but, Naruto paused, unsure how to phrase what he wanted to ask. Realizing he wasn't even sure what he wanted to know the answer to, he simply finished, why? The esteemed elders, and the way Jiraiya said the word, esteemed, left no question in Naruto's mind how he felt about them, decided on a candidate for the position of Godime Hokage. I said, no, so now I have to find my replacement. Is he on a mission? Jiraiya paused to consider his words, then shook his head. It's complicated. Naruto wondered. It hadn't even occurred to him to think that the next Hokage, that any Hokage, really, would be female. Perhaps that tied into what Tenten had mentioned about kunoichi being considered weaker than their male counterparts. Now he really wanted to ask Zetsu about that. What's complicated about it? He questioned, now honestly curious. The Toad Sannin heaved a sigh that was equal parts exasperation and, was that sadness? Naruto struggled to keep his expression neutral, annoyed at his teacher's apparent irritation with his questions. If the blonde wanted roundabout answers, he would just go to Zetsu. He expected Jiraiya to be a bit more forward with what they were doing. Resigning himself to an inquisition, Jiraiya settled himself cross-legged on the ground and rested his elbow on his knee, leaning his face against the palm of his hand. Tsunade has a bad history with Konoha. Naruto frowned, confused at such a vague explanation despite it answering who the upcoming Hokage was supposed to be. Tsunade's exploits were as legendary as her teammates, even more so in a way, as she had been the one to create the system of medical ninja that was used in most villages currently. While her status as one of the Sannin and a powerful kunoichi made her an apt candidate for the title of Godime Hokage, Jiraiya made it sound as if she would be unwilling to take the position. Bad history didn't really justify or explain why Tsunade wasn't currently in the village, especially since most ninja lived difficult and potentially traumatizing lives. What's that mean? War's a bitch, kid. Konoha won the Second Shinobi World War in large part due to Tsunade, but the victory wasn't without its price. White eyebrows furrowed together in remembrance of a time long past. Tsunade wears a crystal necklace, he continued, tapping his sternum twice with his right pointer and middle fingers, inherited from her grandfather, the Shodai Hokage. It's so valuable, you could buy 3 mountains containing gold mines with it. What's this got to do with? Jiraiya forestalled him by holding up a hand, palm out. To Tsunade, the necklace was a symbol of her grandfather's love for the village, and a sign that the wearer was worthy of bearing the title, Hokage. She gave it to her younger brother as a gift on his 12th birthday. He was killed in battle the next day. As you can imagine, Tsunade took her brother's death very hard. Naruto actually couldn't imagine it, having never known his family and lacking the emotional attachment associated with it to sympathize, but he didn't say so, but she still swore to protect the village as her grandfather had before her. She argued with the Sandaime to incorporate medical ninja into all squads that were deployed on missions, but we were at war, and there was no time for such intensive training. He rejected the proposal. But someone else believed in Tsunade's ideals. His name was Dan, and over the period of time that he helped defend her beliefs, they grew close. Eventually, Tsunade fell in love with this man who shared the dreams of her grandfather and brother. The day before they left on a mission in enemy territory, she entrusted him with the Shodai's crystal necklace. Jiraiya closed his eyes and bowed his head in memoriam to Tsunade's lover. By the time Tsunade reached him, it was too late, too many of his vitals had been hit, and even her reputation as the greatest medic nin alive wasn't enough to save him. Another of her precious people had died because she had entrusted him with her dream, giving him a necklace she came to believe was cursed. After that, she left the village, unable to bear being in the place that had inspired her brother and lover to do potentially great things, but which had ultimately led to their deaths. Jiraiya looked up at Naruto. Do you understand now why I need you? Ah, the blonde responded, shaking his head. The Sannin rose to his feet with a sigh. Tsunade needs to be reminded that there's someone who's still willing to follow the dreams of those she lost, that hope isn't dead. That's where you come in. With any luck, your stubbornness and dream to become Hokage will convince her to return to Konoha. Blue eyes widened slightly at that admission. Right, forgot about that. Based on the conversation with the Sandaime, Jiraiya was still operating under the faulty assumption that his desire was to eventually become Hokage. It was good that that argument was, apparently, holding steady, but Naruto had issues with Jiraiya's plans. For one thing, losing loved ones was a poor excuse to essentially abandon one's home and life. Death was a natural part of life, even more so when being a shinobi was one's chosen profession. Granted, the blonde acknowledged that having no loved ones made him slightly biased on the matter, but Tsunade's lack of attachment to the hidden leaf, and again, Naruto tried to ignore the hypocritical application of the thought to his own lifestyle, was troubling. That was another big sticking point. Even if he did accompany Jiraiya on this mission, and did the Sannin even know where to find his wayward teammate? There was no guarantee that Tsunade would return with them, especially if he was supposed to be the linchpin trying to convince her to come back. Weaving half-truths and lies based on his old personality was simple in some respect, especially if he was trying to dupe people who were attached to him, as the Sandaime had been. Using said personality to argue a case he no longer believed to someone he'd never met actually sounded more complex. Tsunade had. Naruto did a rough estimate of numbers based on what he had skimmed about the Second Shinobi World War 30 years, is that right? He wondered, awed, of traveling with the same mindset. To think that he could undo such a way of thinking was laughable. Understanding and manipulating Gaara, whose similarities he could trace in both himself and Zetsu, had been doable, if dangerous. Jiraiya was asking the impossible. Instead of pointing out these flaws, Naruto asked, how come you didn't become the Hokage? Jiraiya snorted. I'm not suited to a life of sitting around and managing politics, kid. I like the adventure, the thrill of the chase. The Sanin's face adopted a dreamy, faraway look that Naruto had, rather unfortunately, learned meant he was thinking of something perverse. He shook it off after a moment. I wouldn't be a good fit. Briefly, Naruto wondered what exactly Jiraiya did for Konoha. Given that he hadn't seen the Sannin until the Chunin exams, it was probably safe to assume that the white-haired man worked outside the Hidden Leaf's walls most of the time. If he did really important work, taking the position of Hokage would certainly put a damper on such activities. He gave himself a mental shake. The point was moot. Sorry, Jiraiya-sensei, he offered, but I'm gonna have to pass. Instead of reacting as he had when the blonde had rejected the Toad summoning contract, Jiraiya merely squinted at him, as if searching for some answer Naruto had hidden on his person. The Sannin crossed his arms over his broad chest. First the summoning contract and now this. Mind telling me why you're passing up an opportunity to personally bring back the next Hokage? She won't make a good Hokage. What? Kid, she's one of the Sannin, one of the best Konohas ever produced. Naruto shook his head. That ain't it. Maybe she belonged here once, but she doesn't care about the village anymore. The old man always talked about the burning will of the village, he continued, pretending to remember something told to him long ago, and she doesn't have it. I'm not gonna go fetch a Hokage who doesn't believe what the old man believed. Unmentioned went the fact that he thought such a belief was stupid. His opinions, to Jiraiya's ears, at least, hopefully carried the conviction of one who actually followed such tenets. The will of fire, Jiraiya murmured, more to himself than Naruto. He seemed to be considering something, though the blonde couldn't say for sure what it is. Perhaps he had gotten lost reminiscing about his former teammate. Tsunade'll come back, he said aloud, though Naruto wondered if he wasn't trying to reassure himself more than anything else. She doesn't abandon those in need. You sure you don't wanna come? I'll teach you a really cool jutsu, he bribed. Nah, I've got things to work on here, refused the Jinchuriki. Collecting the manchineel gas, remaking the sleeping concoction he'd used on Gaara, tweaking the bomb he'd used on Tenten, his collection of poisons and bottled vapors would grow now that he'd experimented with them and wasn't in any immediate danger, giving him time to work on them. Maybe you can teach me when you come back. Jiraiya stared at him for a long moment, before muttering, not as alike as I thought. Whom I not alike? The blonde wondered. Better yet, why was Jiraiya comparing him to someone else at all? Naruto strove to be his own person, as unique as, well, as Zetsu, he supposed. If the Toad Sannin was trying to teach him things in order to turn him into someone else, perhaps learning from him wouldn't be as good a use of his time as he'd originally thought. His specialty needed techniques to supplement it and make it stronger. If Jiraiya couldn't help him with that, maybe it was time their student-teacher relationship ended. Fine, Jiraiya stated, I'm off then. We'll be having a talk when I get back, though. Sure thing, Jiraiya-sensei, Naruto grinned, waving farewell to him. See ya soon. He waited until the white-haired man had disappeared before allowing his arm to drop, the smile on his face fading to a thoughtful frown. It wasn't good that Jiraiya had his suspicions, but there was nothing he could do about it until the Sannin returned. A new Hokage, at least, meant a chance for new beginnings, someone that he could perhaps fool much easier than the Sandaime, someone like Tsunade, whom he had no personal relationship with. Naruto sincerely doubted she would take up the post, based on what his teacher had said, but he would wait and see what happened. For now, he would restock his ceramic jars and continue his experiments, preparing for whatever challenges lay ahead. LLL. He wasn't sure why, but he decided to return to Yamanaka Flowers instead of going straight home. His poisons would be there for him when he did return. The flower shop, on the other hand, needed attention sooner rather than later, and Naruto wanted to get back to work and earn money. especially since Jiraiya would be gone for a bit. Guilt, he told himself, over abandoning Ino in order to befriend Tenten had absolutely nothing to do with his decision. The Jinchuriki found his fellow blonde digging diligently at the opposite planter she'd been working at earlier. The first one had already been refilled with fresh soil and new, colorful plants. Ino turned as his presence became more noticeable, one hand holding a trowel, the other forming a fist which she placed on her hip. Idly, he wondered whether she had sensed or heard his arrival. Well, look who finally decided to come back, she said haughtily, clearly annoyed. Thanks for all the help earlier. Naruto blinked, then offered a hesitant, hopefully charming, grin. You're welcome. Judging by her unchanging glare, Ino didn't seem to appreciate his attempt at dismissing her sarcasm with humor. The smudges of dirt decorating her clothes and face indicated that she'd been hard at work ever since he'd left. Sorry, he tried, but hey, I made a new friend. Ino huffed and returned to her task of refilling the shop's planters with fresh flowers. Naruto remained silent, mildly put out that this achievement hadn't elicited a response from the chatty blonde. Are you mad at me? He hazarded. For a moment, the trowel's movement of digging through soil paused. Yes, Ino answered, returning to her work without turning around. Both. Naruto scratched his head. Females were confusing. He didn't regret leaving Ino to befriend Tenten. The benefits far outweighed the cost, but he knew that the Yamanaka had a temper and held grudges. It would just be easier to accept whatever ire Ino held and move on. Grabbing a gardener's glove that was lying on the ground, he placed it on his right hand and began to dig through the scorched earth of the trellis. They worked side by side in silence for several minutes. Finally, Ino said, Dad was gone at a council meeting this morning. Naruto nodded to show that he was listening, curious to see where the conversation was headed. Ino continued, he came back not too long after you left. By the way she bit off the last word, she was still annoyed with him, and said that it was likely that Shikamaru would be promoted to Chunin. They can do that. Nothing's official until we get a new Hokage, but it'll probably go through. He apparently showed all the right qualities a Chunin needs to have. The blonde waited for more, but nothing else came. Well, isn't that good? He asked. Apparently, that was the wrong thing to say. Ino whirled on him, dirt flying into his face as the trowel was leveled at him. Oh, sure, good for Shikamaru. She snapped. It's great that he gets to move on to other things while I'm still stuck as a genin. I'm twice the shinobi he is, the only difference is he got to show what he could do before we got invaded, and I didn't. Naruto's blue eyes were crossed, staring at the tool quivering an inch from his nose. Unsure how to respond to such a rant, he offered neutrally, neither did Choji. Ino lowered the trowel with a snort, returning to her task. Choji doesn't like to fight, it's not that big a deal to him. He doesn't have a goal to strive for. How am I going to get Sasuke's attention if I don't get a chance to prove myself? She moaned. Naruto didn't point out that Ino's goal of trying to impress Sasuke was as stupid as Choji not having a goal. That would only make her more irate. So, you're not happy for him? The platinum blonde sighed. It's not that. It's just, with Shikamaru getting promoted before us, Choji and I don't have a third person to enter the next set of Chunin exams with. She shook her head. The three of us work better together than apart. Naruto knew well of the teamwork required for the Ino-Shika-Cho combination. He had seen Team 10 practice enough to know the importance of Shikamaru's shadow possession technique to the success of both the Yamanaka's and Akamaki's clan techniques. Still, Ino had just opened up an opportunity to start things anew. Where he had failed to fit in with the now demolished Team 7, he got along well with Team 10. An opening under Asuma's leadership not only allowed him to participate in the Chunin exams the next time they were held, but it potentially got him away from the watchful and suspicious eyes of Jiraiya, who was apparently becoming more of a liability than an asset. What if I took over for Shikamaru? His fellow blonde stared at him, both surprised and dubious. You want to become a member of Team 10? Naruto shrugged. Sure, why not? You need someone to fill the place, and I don't have a team. And we're already friends, so it's not like you have to get used to some random person. It's a perfect fit. Ino shook her head. Naruto, it's not that I don't appreciate the offer, but, she paused to think of the right way to phrase her rejection. You're just not Shikamaru, she finally settled on. Naruto knew what she was referring to. Without the shadow possession technique, Ino didn't think their team would possess the same synergy. Of course, unless they replaced Shikamaru with another Nara, the same would hold true of any replacement they got, except perhaps him. Quick as a flash, his left hand dug into his right sleeve, withdrawing a single senbon from where it was held in the cuff. He dug the needle into Ino's exposed bicep, eliciting a sharp, ow, from the girl as he did so. She turned to him with fire in her eyes, shouting in outrage, "Naruto, what the hell do you think you're do? Hey. What's going on?" The Jinchuriki watched in mild fascination as Ino's motor functions slowed to a halt. Only her eyes, panicked, but still blazing with righteous indignation, and mouth were capable of movement, courtesy of the paralytic toxin the needle had been dipped in. It was made from horse chestnut, which Zetsu had explained the properties of after he had mistakenly tried eating it one day. Normally less effective on humans, he had increased its potency to startling degrees by saturating it with his chakra. As he was seeing, the results were rather spectacular. "What were you saying? Naruto," she growled, "you better hope whatever you did doesn't wear off, 'cause when it does, I'm going to kill you." Naruto frowned at her. "That's no way to get the antidote, Ino. You gotta be nice." She growled again, this time deeper in her throat. Despite the fact that she probably would kill him once she was free, the Jinchuriki found the current situation amusing. "Say that I can replace Shikamaru," he prompted. "It's not my decision," she snapped. When Naruto continued to stare at her patiently, she inhaled a deep breath through her nose and then released it. "Fine, if you can do this." She tried gesturing to herself, but gave up the motion as futile. "I guess you can replace Shikamaru on our team. But it's up to Asuma-sensei," she added, making sure he understood that just because she gave permission didn't mean he was guaranteed the spot. Good enough, he decided. Pulling out one of his scrolls, he unrolled it on the ground and swiped his thumb across the parchment, unsealing a jar and a syringe. Uncorking the jar, he dipped the syringe in and pulled back the plunger, watching it fill with a pale green liquid. Squirting some out of the tip and making sure there were no air bubbles, as Zetsu had told him to do when experimenting with injection antidotes, he stuck the needle into Ino's bicep and pushed down on the plunger. Taking a step back, he resealed his tools and then looked at Ino. "It might take a couple minutes to work," he told her. "Try wiggling a finger or two." She did so, twitching first her pinky, then her ring finger, then her thumb. Naruto felt some measure of pride with his work, despite the antidote having a delayed effect. Perhaps they should be designed that way, so that he could escape if need be. It was a thought for another time. Ino's entire hand was flexing experimentally. To Naruto, it looked as if she were preparing to strangle him. "Well, think I'll just leave you to your work," he said, coating his body in a thin layer of chakra and seeding more into the ground. He took off the glove and threw it at her feet. "See ya later." Even moving through the ground with the attack prevention technique wasn't enough to shield him from Ino's enraged howl of Naruto. LLL. He and Zetsu had reached an unspoken agreement about their meetings. With the plant man's proclamation of being a better-than-average sensor and his advisement to be aware of his surroundings, Naruto would simply wander the forest where he normally met his tutor and wait for Zetsu to appear. If he didn't, the blonde could assume that he was either being followed or watched in some capacity, or that the former Kusanin was simply not around, or uninterested in speaking with him. Zetsu was fickle enough for that to be a possibility. There was apparently no danger, for when Naruto found himself surrounded by Konoha's greenery, Zetsu made his appearance by melding out of an oak tree. "Naruto-kun," greeted White Zetsu enthusiastically. "It has been some time since we had a chance to speak. Jiraiya's been snooping around, but was sneakier. Yes, the Toad-sanin has been making quite a nuisance of himself." So Jiraiya had been keeping an eye on him. His paranoia, at least, wasn't completely without justification. All the more reason to remove himself from the Sanin's presence as soon as possible, even if it might make the older man more suspicious of him in the long run. "He's out searching for the next Hokage," Naruto offered in explanation. "He wanted me to go with, but I didn't wanna." Zetsu nodded, as if such a decision had been a foregone conclusion. Not for the first time, Naruto wondered how good the plant man was at reading people. Certainly he was well-traveled, enough so to understand and dismiss other people's ideologies, but to be able to almost predict scenarios that Naruto would be confronted with and have to give answers to spoke of an ability to understand others that the blonde found unusual. It was especially creepy when Zetsu, who didn't interact with society, was good at it. Good. Intelligent. What did you tell him? Making himself comfortable on the forest floor, Naruto told Zetsu of his conversation with Jiraiya about Tsunade, then backtracked to cover his interrupted training session with the Sannin, his meetings with Ino, and his new association with Tenten. Surprisingly, both sides of the plant man remained silent throughout the monologue. At the end of his retelling, Naruto prompted, "Any thoughts?" "The Sannin's interest in you is disturbing," remarked Black Zetsu, "but you've done good at avoiding him. And you made a new friend." "Well, I dunno about." "Yes," sneered the plant man's darker side in a sibilant caress, "associate yourself with more of these foolish Konoha nin whose desire for attachments get them killed." "She has her uses," Naruto argued. "All the poisons and stuff you've been teaching me have worked so far. Once she helps me learn Senbon, I'll be really good." It was a little hard to believe he was fighting for something that could be construed as camaraderie, but Naruto had learned achieving his goal was a priority, no matter how he had to reach it. Black Zetsu apparently noticed the contradiction, for he said, "Hypocrite." Naruto thought he heard the vaguest lilt of a smirk in his voice, or there would have been, if the plant man's darker half had a mouth to perform such an action. It was almost as if he had expected the blonde to have to resolve such a contradiction. "Well, it is Zetsu," he thought. "Guess I'm not that surprised anymore." "You'll do good with someone to guide you, Naruto-kun," White Zetsu stated. "This calls for a celebration." "Hardly. When he becomes truly independent, then he can celebrate. But then he'll have no one to celebrate with. That's the point." Yeah. Anyway," Naruto interjected, "I had something I wanted to ask you." Zetsu's normal yellow eye rolled over to fixate on the Jinchuriki. "You've fought against a lot of people, right?" The former Kusa-nin nodded. "Fought, beaten, eaten." Tenten's words echoed in Naruto's mind. "A male shinobi stronger than female shinobi. I mean," he continued when Zetsu didn't answer right away, "I've never really been in a real fight where I could see the difference." Zetsu was silent for a long moment, and Naruto briefly entertained the idea that he had posed a question which had stumped his tutor. He was almost disappointed when the plant man came up with a response. Many consider male shinobi to be stronger than their female counterparts, though it is a fallacy to do so. "Bad idea," White Zetsu elaborated when Naruto appeared confused at the word, fallacy. Black Zetsu immediately corrected, "Wrong idea. So it's not true." "That is not what I said. It's just something that people think is true." Naruto scratched his head, confused. This conversation was even harder to follow than most of the ones he had with his tutor. "So it's not right, but it's not wrong either." Zetsu nodded. "Correct. You see, Naruto-kun, it really just depends on the situation. It is generally accepted that men have greater physical strength than women, so they are considered stronger than their kunoichi counterparts. But not all battles depend on physical strength. Kunoichi usually have better chakra control than male shinobi, allowing them to potentially outlast men in a test of endurance. They're also sent out on more seduction missions, as men are normally more distracted by sex than women are. Black Zetsu snorted. "Fools." The blonde took in everything his tutor said with a careful ear, trying to reconcile the former Kusa-nin's experience with what he knew. He had seen more men in higher ranks than women, which would normally point to the conclusion that men were stronger than women, but that could have just been a result of fewer females choosing the career path of a ninja than males. After all, Teams 7, 8, and 10 Hell, even Guy's team, were all composed of 2 males and 1 female, mostly with male Jonin Sensei, too, now that he thought about it. So perhaps the fallacy of males being stronger than females had its roots in sheer quantity of the genders acting as ninja. But that wasn't the entirety of it, at least according to Zetsu. Specialties, he mused. Chakra control, endurance, seduction. That argument sounded familiar, a balance of strengths and weaknesses and what worked well against what. Like a taijutsu specialist versus someone good at ninjutsu, he thought, or someone using poisons against a medic. Someone's almost always gonna have an advantage over someone else, regardless of gender. Using that explanation actually resolved much of the earlier problems he'd come across in his way of thinking, not to mention solidifying his conclusions during the Chunin exams. Just like most of his epiphanies when speaking with Zetsu, this one came around full circle to a fact that he'd already discovered on his own. Simply applying that newfound knowledge to scenarios and situations different from the ones he'd originally learned it from was a skill he hadn't yet perfected, which was why he had Zetsu to bounce ideas off of. He opened his mouth to say something, but Black Zetsu cut across him with a throaty silence. Naruto pouted, mildly affronted, but the plant man's darker side continued. There are two powerful chakra signatures approaching Konoha from the west. One of them is peculiar and vast. The blonde wasn't sure what to say. Zetsu's sensory abilities, while prolific, lent very little meaning to someone who was unused to sensing chakra signatures. A pair of supposedly powerful shinobi entering Konoha could indicate Jiraiya had found Tsunade, but considering that the white-haired Sannin had just left, it was doubtful that he was already returning. More worrying was the fact that these shinobi were apparently strong enough that the former Kusanin felt the need to announce it. This merits investigating. We'll be back soon, White Zetsu announced, and before Naruto could say anything, the plant man was gone. Stymied out of his conversation, Naruto decided to finish reconciling the male versus female and strengths/weaknesses theories he'd learned while he waited for his tutor to return. Once upon a time, he had considered Sasuke to be stronger than both him and Sakura, but that had been due in part to the Uchiha's graduation status as Rookie of the Year. And while it might have been true back then that Sasuke was the strongest genin, he simply couldn't be the best at everything. Everyone had a weakness, and Naruto could distinctly remember being held up against a wall, itching to just stab Sasuke and flood his body with poison. The blonde knew that his former teammate had more skill in taijutsu, ninjutsu, and general knowledge, but in a competition of kill or be killed, he had the abilities to take out the Uchiha. The male-female argument was a bit harder to imagine from purely a gender perspective, even with his closest friend being Ino. In a straightforward battle, where both blondes could use all their skills, Naruto was sure that he could avoid any of Ino's clan techniques and fancy taijutsu simply by using the Shinra Bansho, and then neutralize her with one of his toxins. That strategy had worked well enough against Tenten, at least. He frowned. Creating such a broad generalization seemed unfair, when trying to sort out the differences between the genders. Just as he had contrasted his abilities with Sasuke's and drawn conclusions about their respective skills, it seemed more appropriate to approach each person individually when questioning their strength. Lumping all kunoichi together and collectively considering them weaker than their male counterparts wasn't at all accurate. Hell, the difference between Ino and Tenten was telling enough. So it once again came down to a question of specialties and weaknesses, measuring oneself against his or her opponent. He wondered briefly if women just came across more bad matchups for their abilities in the field, a detriment which had earned them the label of being the weaker sex. Statistics could support that theory, but Naruto was poor enough at math to willingly brush off any such numbers as useless. Numbers meant grades, and grades meant ranking, and he had already determined that things like class and ninja rank meant little in the shinobi world. The seduction thing, though, that was interesting. Ino's flirtations earlier in the day had rather unsettled him, if in part because it had been so unexpected. Naruto was used to being ignored and disliked, and the novelty of having someone of the opposite sex interested in him, pretend or otherwise, was an unusual experience. In that case, the blonde could understand how women were sent out on more seduction missions than men. That wasn't to say that most males would react as he had, but the distraction had been quite effective, pointing to future continued success with additional training and or more experience. Perhaps it also offered an explanation for why young kunoichi like Tenten looked to Tsunade for inspiration. From what he'd heard and read of her reputation, the Sannin seemed to have broken out of the typical role of being looked upon not only as inferior, but also serving as a seductress-type kunoichi. Naruto didn't doubt that Tsunade was skilled, or had been in her prime, at any rate, but he had learned to stop looking for inspiration from those who seemed too good to be true. Worshipping false idols only led to disappointment, and the Jinchuriki felt that he had suffered enough of that for a lifetime. Zetsu returned almost a quarter of an hour later, melding out of a tree in his usual fashion. He was silent as Naruto turned around, fixing him with an expressionless, blue-eyed gaze. When the plant man continued to remain mute, Naruto prompted impatiently, "Well, invaders," White Zetsu chirped cheerfully, as if the prospect of facing foreigners excited him. "Nukanen," Black Zetsu corrected. "Strong ones. They tossed around those Konoha nin pretty good." Did they kill anyone? Concerned. Black Zetsu mocked sardonically. No, shrugged the blonde, just curious. No, such a pity, mourned White Zetsu. So you were worried for nothing? No, nope, White Zetsu chirruped. They were on a mission. Nukanen take missions, Naruto voiced before he could stop himself. Of course. How else do you think they fund their endeavors? Right, duh. He hadn't really thought about what being a missing nin might entail, though it seemed relatively obvious that their skills might be highly sought after for certain tasks. To survive as a Nukanen, a shinobi had to be strong, and the stronger you were, the wider range of missions you could take. Missing nin had to have goals and objectives of their own, those that couldn't be fulfilled while in a village, which required money to accomplish. Not to mention buying clothes, food, lodgings, and other supplies during their travels. So what was their mission? Zetsu's gaze grew suddenly more intense, even the darker half-yellow, pupil-less eye seemed to be focusing intently upon the blonde. You. Naruto blinked. Twice. What? Two men in black cloaks decorated with red clouds broke into the village to capture you. I didn't recognize either of them, did you? No. But the tall one with the large chakra reserves is a former member of Kirigaku's 7 shinobi swordsmen. The Jinchuriki flinched at that, remembering what it had been like to be confronted by Zabuza. But, wait, you said you didn't recognize them, so how do you know that? He was carrying a giant sword that I could detect radiating chakra, Black Zetsu deadpanned. And how do you know they were after me? They claimed to be seeking the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. And that's you. Naruto moaned. I'm screwed. It's okay, Naruto-kun, White Zetsu placated. They left not long after arriving. I think you're safe. The blonde brightened in relief. Really? Zetsu nodded, though Naruto thought the motion came more from the plant man's light side than a unified agreement. Yes, though curious. Why leave when they had the advantage? The genin remained silent as Black Zetsu mused to himself, trying to imagine what this new development meant for him. Black cloaks, with red clouds. White Zetsu added again. It is most likely symbolic. We will investigate. We will. You will. Naruto echoed in surprise. Yes. You have adapted well to your situation and are aware of what you must do. As you are helpless to assist yourself in this matter, White Zetsu tittered lightly, though Naruto wasn't exactly sure at what. Perhaps at his darker side's thinly veiled insult, we will look into this matter. But you don't do anything for free, he pointed out. Black Zetsu snorted. I do not like the idea of an unknown organization comprised of powerful shinobi running amok. Nukanen work by themselves, that is the natural order. This disruption displeases me. We will return with more information. Bye-bye, Naruto-kun. White Zetsu offered as the plant man disappeared into Konoha's greenery. Naruto stared at the spot his tutor had vanished, trying to process the events of the day. Jiraiya was suspicious of him, Ino was mad at him, Zetsu was helping him, and there was a group of strong shinobi capable of easily infiltrating one of the 5 great shinobi nations hunting him. He turned around and began to walk back home, thoughts in a whirl. I need to get way stronger way faster, or else I'm dead. LLL. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.